All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to another NFL team preview video for the 2020 season. Today we wrap up the NFC South division and we're going to be taking a look at the Carolina Panthers. One division to go after this. Yay, season's almost here. So the Panthers are in the middle of a rebuild, and I think this is going to be a difficult transition for them because, as we'll see as we move on through this video, the schedule looks pretty difficult. The defense is suspect with all of the new starters that are projected to be on this defense, and they do have a nice young core of talent on this team. Don't get me wrong. They've drafted well over the last couple of years. DJ Moore, Brian Burns, and then this year Derek Brown. But they do bring in a rookie head coach who only has 1 year of NFL experience as an assistant. And they're really going to be relying on his ability to rebuild programs as he did at Temple and Baylor, and hope that he brings that to the table in Carolina, as they've given him a lengthy contract to begin his NFL head coaching career. So we'll have to see where that goes. But the first year is always pretty telling on how things are going to go. This is kind of a glass half full, glass half empty situation. It just depends on how you look at it. There's pros and cons all over the table. As I said, it's a difficult schedule. The amount of talent that is now no longer on this team. I mean, you think back to the 2015 Super Bowl team. Those people were all gone. Cam Newton, Greg Olsen, Thomas Davis, Luke Kuechly unfortunately had to retire. It is what it is at this point. But I do think that there is some hope for this team on the horizon. The only problem is that they play in an extraordinarily difficult division, and they may not be ready to compete just yet. But in the meantime, before we get into the projected starting depth chart, let's take a look at the 2019 recap. They were 5-11 overall last year. Offense ranks 19th in the league. Excuse me. They were 20th in passing, 14th in rushing. The defense ranked 23rd overall. They were 13th against the pass, 29th against the run. Matt Rule is, of course, your first-year head coach with a 0-0 clean slate record coming out of college. The snapshot of the previous 4 years: in 2018, they were 7-9. 2017, they were 11-5. They made the playoffs that year. 2016, 6-10, and then 2015 was, of course, that phenomenal 15-1 season where they went to the Super Bowl and eventually lost to the Denver Broncos. And it doesn't look like they've recovered really all that much since then. And I think that this was probably the correct time for ownership to hit the reset button. As sad as it was, and I'm sure as upset as the fans were to see Cam Newton released in the manner that he was, Greg Olsen as well, maybe that's better for those players to get out of the environment where it was clear they were no longer wanted. So it's hard when it happens. It is a business. I do root for the players more than I do the organizations, and because the organizations obviously have more control, if you will. But one day I think the players will realize that they have all the power, and things like that won't happen anymore. But unfortunately, that's not the era that we live in. We live in this era where Cam Newton is now a New England Patriot, and the new face of the franchise, for at least for the moment, other than Christian McCaffery, is going to be Teddy Bridgewater. So that's a nice segue into the projected starting depth chart. We'll start with the offense. I'm going to be rooting hardcore for Teddy Bridgewater this year because he's finally out of the Saints. Personal biases aside, we don't have a great record. The Saints and the Vikings do the previous 3 years. So it'll be a lot easier to wish him success this year as a member of the Panthers, and I hope he does well. And I really hope that he proves to people that he earned this. After backing up Drew Brees for 2 years and going 5-0 in his relief, I think people are going to be more than surprised at what he's able to accomplish, especially with this group of talent around him. DJ Moore, Curtis Samuel, Robbie Anderson, Seth Roberts. This is an absolutely phenomenal wide receiver core, and I think this might be the strength of the team as it is. DJ Moore has developed nicely, a 1,000-yard receiver last year. Rodney Anderson comes over from the Jets on a 2-year, $20 million contract as a deep threat. And then Curtis Samuel and Seth Roberts have been developing nicely. The one big problem, of course, is going to be the tight end position. Ian Thomas has the job of trying to make people forget about Greg Olsen. Good luck with that, but he is a nice young tight end. I think he can do well. The offensive line is a little bit different this year. You have Russell Okung at the left tackle position after he was traded to the Chargers. They sent Trey Turner over there. The left guard position, Miller. For the center, I think it's Paradis. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then the other side, the rest of the right side is Daly and Modden. The only unfortunate statistic for this group last year, at least those that remain, the Carolina offensive line allowed, I think, a league-high 50-some sacks last year, so they really need to get their pass protection under control. Other than that, they've got a great offense, and the main threat weapon is, of course, Christian McCaffery at the running back position. Super dynamic player, probably one of the best in the league. He's definitely going #1 in all of your fantasy drafts for the next couple of weeks. That is for sure, unless you're in my league, of course. But Christian McCaffery, the only thing that scares me, which we'll talk about later, is the workload. 403 touches last year is a lot, but he did produce a 1,000-yard rushing and receiving season. So the offense will revolve around him. Moving on to the defense, this is where things get a little bit more suspect, and I don't know how much they're going to improve. But they did spend all 7 of their draft picks in this previous draft back in April on defensive players, which you don't see too often. That's kind of an unwritten rule not to do that, if you will. But I think they spent their picks wisely. So taking a look at the secondary, the back 7 is where I'm most concerned, but they do have some key players. Eli Apple from New Orleans, Jeremy Chin that they drafted from Southern Illinois, and which I couldn't believe how far he fell, but all the safeties fell far this year, Grant Delpit, Xavier McKinney included. So it is what it is with the safety position being bizarre this year in the draft. They also have Boston back there in the back and the secondary. So the secondary seems a little suspect to me. They might be pretty bad in pass defense again, but you never know. For the front 7, you have Thompson, Whitehead, and Haynes at the linebacker position. And the front defensive line is probably where they're going to be the strongest on defense, with Weatherly, Derek Brown coming in, Short, and Brian Burns on the right, on the other defensive edge side, which, if I can just say, Brian Burns is one of my favorite defensive players to come out of the draft in the last few years. When he went 16th overall to Carolina, I thought that was criminal. He should have been a top 10 pick. Scouting him prior to that draft was a really fun time, seeing the kind of bend and power that he has. Brian Burns is going to be a great player in this league, and I think he proved that to a lot of people last year. So that is a look at your projected starting depth chart for the 2020 season. Let's take a look at the schedule. They open the season at home against the Raiders, Bucks and Chargers on the road, Cardinals at home, Falcons on the road, Bears at home, Saints on the road, and then Falcons at home to wrap up the first half of the season. Pretty daunting schedule, if you ask me. I think the Cardinals are going to be competitive this year. The Raiders are in the middle of an arms race in their division. They've loaded up on offense. The Chargers are questionable, but they have a phenomenally talented roster and a great defense. The Bucks have Tom Brady. He's now a problem for this team now that he's in the NFC South division. And yeah, it's just a daunting schedule for the first half overall, and it doesn't get any easier in the second half when you open up on the road against the Chiefs, defending Super Bowl champions. Then you got 2 home games, Bucks and Lions. Then you got a road game in Week 12 against the Vikings, where Teddy Bridgewater will be returning to Minnesota. That is going to be a phenomenal game. I can't wait for that one. And then the Broncos at home, Packers and Washington football team on the road, and then you wrap up the season with a home game against the Saints. So it's a difficult schedule, no question about it. The Raiders, the Cardinals, I think could be improved teams. You've got a really competitive, hyper-competitive, could be one of the best divisions in the game. Depends on who you ask, with the Saints, the Bucks, and the Falcons. They're going to have a hard go at it this year. The rebuild is not going to be easy. There's going to be some bumps and bruises, and really it's going to depend on how healthy Christian McCaffery can stay. There's no evidence to suggest that he can't do it. So really, it's going to be a tough road, but I think that they're more than capable of gutting this one out and seeing what they're made of for this first year of this rebuild. 3 big storylines that I'm looking at for this year. Number 1, Christian McCaffery's workload. 403 touches is a lot, and as every year in his career, they've gone up. I believe the first year was like 202, 220 or something like that. 2 years later, that almost doubles. So with the amount of wide receiver talent that they have, maybe they could use him more often as a decoy, bring those touches down just a little bit. Of course, people that are drafting him number 1 overall in fantasy don't want to hear anything about that, but I think that that's the situation that you're in. You know, you come off a back-to-back 1,000-yard season, 15, 16 touchdowns, you're going to have maybe just a hair of regression. Not that that means that he's getting worse. It just means that you don't want to overwork him. Big storyline number 2 is, of course, pass protection. We did mention that this offensive line allowed a league-high 50-some sacks last year, and they need to do a better job of that. And with a couple new pieces, it'll be interesting to see how well they do in pass protection. And then storyline number 3 is the defense as a whole. It wasn't good last year. There's some question marks about depth. They don't have the flashiest secondary, if you will, but they do have some great talent up front. I think Weatherly might be an underrated free agent pickup. Derek Brown is absolutely one of the best draft picks from this previous draft. And I've already talked up Brian Burns about as well as I could. So that's going to do it for this episode of the 2020 NFL team preview videos featuring the Carolina Panthers. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you in the next one.